All right. We are live. Okay, let me add my guests. Hey, there you are. Let's add my friends. Invite to join. All right.
Hey,
Hello.
lovely. How's it going?
I'm good. How are
I
you?
am well. So good to see you.
I'm
Hi.
adding folks.
Hello.
Hi. This
Can
is
y'all hear me okay?
exciting.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Welcome. Oh my gosh. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
How
Hey.
Well, how's
y'all
about you?
How's everybody
doing?
doing?
Good.
I am so
Good,
happy to see
good.
Y'all
y'all.
look amazing.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Happy-
Okay. So
Friday.
let me
Happy
see.
Friday for
Okay. I
sure.
got everybody in here. Let me see. I think I can add. Okay. Everybody's in. Great. We're good. We're good. Okay. Well, dang. We got time.
Yeah.
Let's give folks a moment to get in. How y'all Friday going so far? How y'all doing?
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Mine's going
Yeah,
pretty
Yeah.
I'm doing good.
well.
I had a whole bunch of family come in town
Yeah.
today. All the Jacksons, so Missy's whole family, like here, they're swimming outside and
I
everything like
love
that.
that.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Where is
That's cute.
everybody?
That's
Where's
cute.
everyone located?
I'm in Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in North
I'm in Chicago.
Kansas.
Wow.
Oh, can
We're all over
Yeah.
the place. Okay. So, all right. I'm in Syracuse, so I'm the only one over here. Okay. That's all right. Okay. Well, y'all know this is about it's all about reading and books and Black feminism, but we also drinking. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope y'all did
Yeah,
everybody bring their
yeah,
oh, is it
yeah.
tea? Is that what we're drinking, AD? We drinking tea?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Definitely,
Okay,
definitely.
good.
And Arnold Palmer. A
Okay.
strawberry Arnold Palmer.
Oh,
Oh,
good. I
Yeah.
let y'all know. Okay. I don't know if y'all watched the last one, but I get crossfaded real quick. So
I was
Yeah.
just about to ask what you smoking
what am
on
I
over there.
smoking? This is because I have a lot. This is Zittles
yes.
strain mixed with strawberry lemonade.
Zittles.
Oh,
Yeah. I put some
hey.
strawberry lemonade
Oh, okay. All right.
in the
Hey,
strain.
hmm
yes, luxury. That's luxury.
Um, yeah, I grow my own now, so it's a lot of it's a
Nice.
You grow your own.
oh
You
yeah,
done leveled up for
things have
real.
changed. Look, we gotta catch up. We gotta catch up. So
We do,
since
we do.
we're all here, I'm gonna get us started so we can have more time to talk about the books for the evening. But as folks are joining in, I see we have about 15 or so folks on already. I'll just give folks background on what this is. So this is my new online IG session. We had something like this on Zoom over the period of the pandemic, over COVID. But really, it's a way for us to talk. It's for the culture. It's for us to have critical dialogue about Black feminist texts. It's called Prosecco, Prose, and Politics. We was gonna add pot in there because they was like, "You're gonna be smoking weed," but we thought that 4 P's was too much, so it's just 3 P's. But Prosecco, Pros, and Politics, we come, we sip a little, we talk about some books, and we talk about the political implications for this particular moment. So tonight, we are talking about two incredible books, Citizen from Claudia Rankine, and we're talking about Black Feminism Reimagined from Jennifer Nash. So I'm really excited to talk to y'all about these books. And for folks who don't know who I am or how we got here, my name is Jen Jackson. They, them pronouns. I'm an assistant professor at Syracuse University. I talk a lot on the internet. You can find me all over the place. I have a book coming out in January called Black Women Taught Us from Penguin Random House. I'm very excited about this. You can find it on the internet now, pre-order it. But this series is birthed out of the Black Feminist Book Club. So if you look on any platform for hashtag Black Feminist Book Club, you will find me posting syllabi and lectures and all of that. Get tapped in. You can check out the link in my bio. There's a link tree there. Join the newsletter. Just get more information if you want to follow along. Tonight, we're talking about the books from this month, June, and the books from May. And I'm talking with some of my friends, new friends, and old friends. All right. So I'm going to actually read y'all's bio. I'm going to be real formal because I'm an academic. I'm gonna read. Yes, I'm gonna read it. I'm actually gonna read it. All right. So first we have T. Smith. They them pronouns. T is a Black, queer, non-binary PhD candidate at the University of Chicago in the Department of Political Science. My old home. That's where we met. As a Black, queer, feminist, abolitionist.
Yeah.
T is an organizer and creative who loves Blackness always and all ways. Dr. Kyla Adia Story. She, her pronouns, is an award-winning associate professor and Audre Lorde Endowed Chair at the University of Louisville. Dr. Story is the co-creator, co-producer, and co-host of Louisville's public media Strange Fruit podcast. It's a very popular podcast, which I went on a few years ago, award-winning 8-year running show. What's really also important to this conversation as well, Dr. Story is a part of a contingent of really dope Black feminist scholars and comrades called the hashtag Pleasure Ninjas, who are very committed to thinking about our care, our love, our community, and how we embody that in public. So we will talk about that in just a bit. Lastly, A.D. Boynton, he, they pronouns, is a queer Black Southern writer, poet, and cultural critic working and living in Kansas. A doctoral candidate in the Department of English at University of Kansas, Boynton's critical work and poetry often draws connections between Black speculative fiction, popular culture, and American cultural history. So I'm excited because I have questions prepared for y'all tonight. So we already asked the big question, which was, what are y'all drinking? But in this political moment, right, in this moment where there are attacks on critical race theory, where there's all this work to remove Black feminist texts, Black queer texts from classrooms, both at the K through 12 level and in higher education, I just want to ask y'all, what do y'all feel like are the implications for, this kind of conversation, for reading these texts, for engaging with this work in this moment?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a hugely reactive moment. But we're also simultaneously seeing all the power and empowerment that has come from years, decades long of Black feminist struggle, Black queer struggle. And the right, to me, is threatened. They're immensely threatened by what I'd say the prose and the activism.
Yeah.
They're threatened by the writing. They're threatened by the pedagogy. They're threatened by the activism. All those things, and they're trying to annihilate slowly, like all those things on multiple fronts, because they recognize the power and the empowerment that comes from those things. We're seeing ourselves, right? I mean, they're seeing like, hey, we ain't taking this, we ain't dealing with this no more, right? They're seeing that, and they're literally like, how dare you? How dare you have audacity? How dare you feel empowered? How dare you walk on the street and not move to the sidewalk? How dare you look me in the eye? How dare you not help me in the store? How dare, right? So like our sense of self in like these theoretical and academic ways, but also like public communal ways that I think that their interaction, and they're also seeing it at their own table to me too. Like Ted Cruz's daughter, right? She doesn't want nothing to do with him, right? So it's in their homes. They're like, Mom, Dad, what are you doing? Those are my comrades. Those are my friends. Like, what do you mean transphobia, right? They're not having it either. And so they're wildly threatened by what this means for truth and honesty and justice and equity to come to fruition. They feel like that's a real possibility. Seemingly, even though they've done this kind of reactionary stuff before, it seems more intense at this moment. It's almost as if they really, really wholeheartedly believe that change is happening, change is coming, and there's all this possibility on the horizon, and they are like, no. That's my perception of it, because I just find that even just walking around Black and free, right? People are like, the stares, the gawking, like, because nobody's walking around like, so even something that seems like a simple gesture like that, I think that they are threatened, they're scared, they're terrified. that who they are is recognizable now, and
Yes,
that people are intolerant of it.
absolutely, absolutely. T, AD?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I echo all of that. I think you essentially took the words out of my mouth there. And I think I really like what you said about this question that they're asking, right, of how dare you? And I think that kind of reflects to me the power of Black feminism, right? Like at the core, it is this thought of
Right.
daring. What happens when we dare to think otherwise, when we dare to challenge, when we dare to fight back and push and to reimagine and think about something new? And that's threatening, right? Sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
can feel even threatening to us, trying to think about the answers, trying to push through that. But we continue to do so. And I think
Mm,
that's where the threat is coming from, right? It's a challenge. And to see Black feminism, Black feminist works, politics, epistemologies become or continue to be these touchstones,
Yep.
that they feel threatened by that, you know? And I think that just speaks more to the power of keep doing the work, keep building together, keep reimagining, keep rethinking, keep letting them be threatened.
Yeah.
Because essentially that's what we should be doing. They should be threatened, you know? And I think like there's no stopping, you know, the
I
train
Mm-hmm.
is
agree.
going, keep
I
on
agree.
pushing.
AD?
And I think particularly around the point of truth, right? Like what we're
Mm,
witnessing is not just an onslaught of like, oh no, we don't want you to read these books, right? We are very much getting to the point
Mm,
where legislative attacks are redefining words, where
mm-hmm.
we are
mm,
witnessing anti-intellectualism
Yes.
take such violence and such kind of like full scale, like the fact that one parent can have a disagreement about a book that they most likely have not read
Yes.
and can ban it for an entire county
Uh-huh.
is
mm-hmm,
ridiculous. But I think to the point of Black feminist history, I'm just so reminded by the fact that Ida B. Wells, in the midst of her truth telling, was hunted down, right? Like that, like
Mhm.
there are just very clear
mm-hmm,
examples of the kind of violence and the kind of pushback that even just honesty receives.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
mm,
Okay.
Yep.
So I think these are this okay, that's important, right? And I think it's an important transition for specifically what we're talking about tonight, right? We're talking about two texts, one that's reimagining and rethinking not just Black feminism, but intersectionality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then another citizen that is also thinking about the ways that we do interact in public, right? Blackness, as Rankin talks about throughout the text, cast against this stark white background, right? And the texts are
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm,
conversation in the exact way that y'all described.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I want to start actually talking about the books, right? So first, I think I want to start with Rankin, right? And I'll start talking with UT, right? So thinking about Citizen and this idea of it being an American lyric, right? The idea that this entire, I think it's
mm-hmm,
160 or something page text is meant to be read as a continuous section of prose, to be read as a
mm-hmm,
continuous experience and thought, right? And it takes us through,
mm-hmm,
kind of this affirmation and racialization of you are Black because you are in a grocery store and someone is recognizing that you are Black, whether you want to be in this conversation or not,
Right.
right? All these different components of
right.
how you are cast up against this background, and then moving through the experiences that Serena Williams has had over the years, at various instances of kind of how this being cast against a white background is not a two-dimensional thing, but actually existing in a white imagination, right? And so when we think about that, right, it's
Mm-hmm,
very complex. I was like, okay, this is like my third time reading Citizen. And I think what stood out for me this time was I wanted to talk about it in relation to our ideas around abolition, right? I think it's easy to talk about Rankin and say, okay, this is a text about microaggressions. It's easy to pick up this text and say, oh, this is a text about white supremacy or the white gaze. But I think what might be something we don't talk about enough is the fact that this is a text about abolition and imagination of ourselves outside of the compartments or containers that are made for us. So I wanted to talk to UT about this. We are both organizers. We're both raised in the same abolition tradition. And And I wanted to hear your thoughts
Mm-hmm,
about
mm-hmm.
Rankin's kind of commentary in this text that can help us think about abolition theory and about this idea of a possibility for Blackness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Rankin offers some very interesting and compelling things about liberation, and I think also some notions of abolition, right? Um, so I think I'll start with abolition, and I think to put it simply and kind of what you gestured to is that Rankin gestures towards these sort of micro, but also some moments of macro conceptions of race and racism. But when it comes down to it, right, anti-blackness is everywhere, right? It's inscripted everywhere. It's not just in these moments of Serena or what she talks
Mm-hmm.
about, at the World Cup. And further, I think, in discussions about abolition, sometimes people think it's about just the
Mm-hmm.
deconstruction of
Yeah,
police or the deconstruction of prisons. And it's like, it's not
absolutely.
about that. It's about so much more. And also, it's not just about deconstruction, right? It's also about
Yes,
rebuilding and remaking. If we were to tear everything down today,
right.
then what do we have tomorrow? So I think, in this like incredibly artistic way, Rankin kind of makes clear how innate anti-blackness is in this world and how inextricable it is from
Yeah.
all of our lives. Serena is experiencing it, on the tennis court and obviously in other places as well. But anti-blackness is also chilling,
Yeah.
waiting for you, at the water cooler at your job, right? So, it's like it's everywhere that we look, and I think that's an important aspect when we're thinking about liberation and abolition and movement work. And I think another sort of thing about Rankin's work that really compelled me was kind of this lack of clear boundaries. I think, Jen, you described it as like this continuous work, but for me, I think there's so much
Yes.
white space in the text. There's not really many clear moments
Yes.
of when does one
Yeah.
piece stop
Yes.
and
Yeah.
when does another start. And yeah, this time around, I did myself the disservice of reading the digital version,
Mm,
so it read much differently, but it almost creates like these intentional
yeah.
pauses, right? And she also uses a lot of influx of photos and
Yeah.
imagery and things like that. And I think like, you know, I think when it has these no clear boundaries, Rankin would also say neither should our imaginations, right? So I think this is where her teachings about liberation come in more. It's like Citizen is this communal text. It was stories that some were her own, some were her colleagues, some were her friends. It's this collective story of grief and of reckoning that has these messy boundaries and surprises and shock, and that's movement work, right? And a text is not just this collection of words, right? It's also a piece of art. And I think poets really take advantage of this artistry, the size of the words, the amount of white space, this transition
Mm-hmm.
between poetry and prose and essay. I think, some of these choices are seen as
Mm-hmm.
unorthodox, right? Or untraditional. And I think that's intentional. I think it's this intentional gesture
Absolutely.
to think otherwise. And to me, that's how we get free. That's how we get liberated. We think otherwise about the world. We defy what has typically been accepted as true. We have
Yeah.
to rethink. We have to reimagine. We have to remake. And I think that is a large part of what Reagan is trying to offer us on this
Absolutely.
conversation about
Absolutely. So
liberation.
I want to talk about that, right? I think you bring up some really good points, and I saw, you know, uh, some reactions, right? Because thinking about the use of white space, thinking about even with like the certain pages where, there's no clear line between one page and the other, right? I think that I want to just get y'all's reactions to, I feel like this is a visceral text, right? It's an emotional text,
Mhm.
like it's an effective text.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear
Yeah,
from y'all
yeah,
about
yeah.
that part of it too, right? Like there's a part of it where I think there's something here where, oh yeah, there's a story here that talks about someone sitting in a car and having a very uncomfortable conversation. And then they sit there and they try to let time kind of move the conversation to a different place. And it registered with me because I'm thinking of all the times where, as a Black person moving in the world, where we have to just breathe
Mhm.
and hope that the breath
Yeah,
will
yeah.
move the thing. But there is no breathing
Mm,
in this book.
hmm
So I wanted to get y'all's reaction to that and to those choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have an extensive answer to that. Just very much that did kind of serve as moments of shock for me, right? I have notes to myself under most of the images where I'm like, my jaw dropped, you know, like it comes out of nowhere. You don't expect it. There's, you know, half of a page of white space,
Yes.
and then there's this very strong
Mm-hmm.
image that just evokes a lot, right? And so, yeah, like I said, it's like the white space kind of helps to direct or maybe even pause the tempo of the book. But I think also the way that you're digesting what she's saying and what she's gesturing at when she inserts these images is also really speaking to the power of this text.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I just had moments when I
Yeah.
sat there and I was like,
It's hard because
that did
it's
a
hard
little
because
more than I thought I
Rankin
would.
literally
Yeah.
goes to every intimate part of our lives, our
Yes.
driveways, our houses, like the one story, the poem, like again, story, because like I'm reading it like a story. I'm really reading it like a novel, a ghost story almost, or like something that's scary or spooky. The one where she talks about the friend babysitting, and then there's some menacing man outside of the house, but that's the friend babysitting. And then the impulse to say, well, why don't you just take your phone on the back next time?
Backyard.
You know, I mean, it was so, like, I feel
Yeah.
like it's a text that so many Black folk experience anti-Blackness in all of these different ways in our neighborhoods, in our driveways, on the subway, in the grocery store. You know, I saw your tweet the other day, Jen, and I was like, yes, where you go into stores and people think you work there. You don't have nobody's uniform.
Dressed
No
in a business suit.
no name tag. You look, in fact, you look like you don't work there at all. But because of Blackness, because of anti-Blackness, right? It's like, you know, I was in the store the other day and I was trying to grab something and trying to remember. And then, you know, again, this white woman, and you know, they're staring at you because they be like, right, ready to offend, but like with this little smile, like, and she's like, and she's like, I just can't find anything. And I was like, oh, and walked and prayed. And I walked away. You know what I mean? Because my
you problem, ma'am. That's a you problem, ma'am.
Thank you. Like for me, it's like all I did was make eye contact because I was trying to find an item, and I knew that the next question would be after that statement. Do you know where so and so is, or what aisle this way is, or that way? And I just, so it does. I mean, it happens all the time. And that's what makes it a visceral text, because you're reading it, reliving those experiences, and then being shocked by some that you haven't experienced yet. And you're like, oh, Lord.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the viscerality too comes from, actually, to your earlier point, Jen, about how these two texts are speaking across to one another. There's an aspect that is queer, right? That is at all times happening throughout Citizen. And I'm saying queer in part because there's a way that this is a speculative poem that is that is actually like a queer genre throughout, right? Like it has multiple voices. There are multiple things happening. We're going to talk about Afrofuturism probably a little later, but yeah, like the indiscernibility of time is something. The fact that there are so many parts where you could argue that the speaker, whether it's Rankin or not, is haunted by the whatever, right? So yeah, visceral indeed.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to put tack in that, right? Because we are going to come back to Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism, and we're going to talk about form, right? We have a lot of poets in the room, so I want to talk about that in a bit. So let's maybe move a bit to Nash, and start to put these two texts really in conversation with one another. And I'm a Virgo, y'all, so I'm low-key like, damn, bitch, you did that shit, because they in conversation for real. So just saying, like, it's good. So let's talk about Nash, right? Like, I'm gonna be completely honest, because I'm a very honest person, but I struggle sometimes with work that is interrogating intersectionality, because I come to it with the defensiveness that Nash is talking about. And I can be honest about that. I can be honest about that. That's why this text resonates for me, and I have to sometimes read it and sit down and like talk to myself a little bit, like, girl, like, you feel convicted, because I hold a lot of the aspect that Nash is talking about in the text, this idea of intersectionality wars and originalism, and the sect of folks who root the origins of intersectionality through a Francis Beale, Combahee River Collective, and a Julie Cooper lens, right? I'm of that tribe, right? I've been trained by the Barbara Ransby's, Kathy Cohen's, Angela Davis's of the world, right? And so that is my lineage. So I will say, I have struggled in the past with Nash's work, and I struggled with picking this book up again. And I'm really glad that I did, because I feel like I read it differently reading it in conversation with Rankin. And I started to see defensiveness and surrender, right, in conversation with one another. I started to see these emotions that I hold in trying to protect intersectionality and trying to protect our citational histories, right, and trying to protect what I've experienced and lived. I'm starting to understand that there's just so much complexity there. And maybe we as Black feminist theorists, queer theorists, right, haven't always given ourselves enough credit, right, for our own affective orientation, right, to what the whitening of women's studies and the mainstreaming of queer studies has done to us, right? Like our affect, our emotion, our responses are legitimate. Our defensiveness is earned. And I feel like in reading this text, I was like, yeah. So that's where I landed. That's where I landed. But I was so Dr. Story, where'd you land here?
Yes. I mean, I really this book was like a struggle for me, because I'm like, so what if I'm defensive? Who you know my life? Who are you? So it was like, to me, I was like always throwing it down when I originally read it, and then I was like, when we read it again, like you said, in conversation with Rankin, and I read it, years after it's come out, I'm like, oh my God, okay, yeah, I'm defensive about it. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Because, now I've been working on accountability. And so, you know what I mean? And so so I think it's a struggle to read, because it's an interior conversation. It's not a conversation around somebody, right? I mean, she's talking about the co-optation, the mainstreaming, and all, right? But she's really having an interior conversation with Black feminist women about, hey, are we just going to stop at intersectionality? Are we just going to stop there when there's all of these other possible theoretical pathways, paradigms, and, Black feminism as a tradition is just so rich, and because DEI stuff and the fallout of 2020 and all of this reactionary anti-racism work that was coming out, like, immediately, and using that social justice language, using it so much that now the right uses it, right? I mean, Donald Trump the other day, 45, the other day, when he was being arraigned, was doing this. He was doing this. And they got a picture of him doing it. And so that's how, right? And so, when I see stuff like that, when I see the co-optation of the language, when I see that movements that have nothing to do with equity, justice, liberation at all are using the language of this theoretical and activist tradition, like, it really unnerves me and grinds my gears. But I really resonate with Nash's point, like, y'all can have at it. You know what I mean? Go and have at it. You know what I mean? Because what was happening, I mean, I used to kick my students out of class. Like, if my students hadn't read the Black, I done assigned Francis Beale, I had a nerd to come up in here, and you ain't read it. And I would kick them out and get so mad, and, and not realizing, my blood pressure is going up doing this shit, right? I mean, this is, okay, and so y'all not about to wear me out. And
Right.
I love the theory, and I hope you do. And if you don't, I'm still gonna come in here and have a good damn time because I
Right.
like talking about these texts. So if you don't have the energy
Mhm.
or the capacity or the spoons to discuss the text, I'm gonna just be prepared to do it. And it to me doesn't
That's it.
feel like overwork like it used to.
That's
You know, I wanted them.
it.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
was really wearing myself thin that if students didn't get it, or, you know, like Nash has said in interviews about the text where, you know, a cis straight white male student would be like, well, because of my intersectional identities as a cis straight white Christian male, and it's like, Lord, you know what I mean? And then the students react to it negatively, you know, but again, all of that, like blood pressure, stress, like
Yeah.
metabolically, I just started thinking about metabolically what it was doing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it came to a point where it was almost a denial of my joy for the work,
Yes.
and me not even wanting to engage anything else but this fight of get it right. You got to get intersectionality right, and you got to get the citation right, and you got to get this right, you know. And then I was like consumed by it. And so yeah, I mean, it's a lot going on in this book. It's a lot, and it's a lot. The thing I appreciated about it is that it's highly theoretical, it's dense, it is thorough, and then it's like has a lot of feelings in it too. So I just really appreciated that because Nash really kind of delves into like, yeah, like we have feelings about this, and we have to acknowledge that we have those feelings about this and recognize whether or not those feelings are bringing us harm or inviting pleasure or inviting joy.
Right.
We need to do that, right? Because a part of justice also looks like us being alive, pleasurable, joyous. It doesn't look like you know, rocking to the wheels until intersectionality kill us. Right.
Okay. So so this is an important point, right? And this is something I want to hear from everybody on, right? Because I think that in reading Nash in community with Rankin, right, you start to see the ways that these interactions, this kind of constant confrontation, and I think what's really important is the use of the word unwanted, right? Unwanted interactions, unwanted confrontations, unwanted, right? Confrontation isn't necessarily bad, right? Interactions aren't bad. But when we're moving through the world and we want to go get some groceries or buy, you know, some shoes at the mall, we don't necessarily want to be your tour guide, right? So it's the unwanted interactions that I think, you know, when we start to think about the ways that affects us. And when Rankin says to us, you know, we hold that in our bodies, right? We bring that with us. I read Nash's, right, conversation on intersectionality differently when I begin to kind of metabolize what Rankin has given us, right? I think originally when I started reading Nash, I was like, hold on, wait. It's like I can talk about my mama, but you can't talk about my mama. You know what I'm saying? I was like, hold on. Not my intersectionality. You know what I'm saying? But now what I'm realizing, right, is that there is a conversation here that Nash is giving us, especially in these kind of moments where she's talking about surrender, right? She's giving this conversation to say, hey, let it go, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily be defensive or hold on, right? Because you can imagine something on the other side of intersectionality, that there may be more for us, right? There may be something even freer for us. And in using so much energy and time to hold on, right, to intersectionality, not only are you harming, right, or internalizing harm, right, becoming the kind of vanguard of women's studies departments and becoming the faces, the pseudo faces of every intersectional and fake DEI movement, right, like being appropriated every time we turn around, stealing all of our citational work, erasing us in public, and then acting like we didn't see it with our eyes, right? Sorry, y'all. But as that is happening, right, she's saying you don't actually have to engage in that struggle, right? And so what I want to hear, I guess, from everybody else is like, when we think about pleasure and joy, and also obviously, Dr. Story, I want to talk to you about this pleasure ninja movement, right? Like, because there's a lot of shame in Black pleasure, right? There's a lot of, because we are expected, especially for Black women, to be the mules of the world, right? We are expected to carry the burden. Black queer femme folk especially are expected to do the intellectual and emotional labor of communities. So who are we to then engage in forms of pleasure? That's arrogance, right? That is anti-status quo. And I think it's so great that we're in a moment where we're like, fuck that shit, right? But also, how can we apply that to something so critical to our academic journeys and our intellectual and emotional journeys as intersectionality?
Mm. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think I would answer that similarly to how you two answered, where you landed with this, because I think I had a very similar story to that. I had a moment of kind of like checking myself. I read this book for the first time back when it came out, and this was my first time sort of re-sitting with it. So when I'm sitting here and I'm getting to this section about Black feminists as offensive, I think even out loud I was like, I'm not offensive, and I was like, oh, hold on. And I was like, okay, all
Yes.
right, maybe so. Maybe so. And then I was like, but then I had a moment, I was like, no, because it's not. And then I'm sitting there having these moments like trying to justify, why I'm defensive and what it is that I want and why I feel these things. And like, that was a funny moment, right? But then I realized, it's that's not what it's about. That's not what I'm invested in. And I think like there's a lot of value in critique, right? It's constructive. But also I think, Black feminism is supposed to take us somewhere. It offers us so much. It offers us things that we have yet to even step into, right? So, but after reading about reading Nash and like her account of this critic and reading about the critic, I think it's sort of just reawakened in me this thought of, okay, but where does it take us? And like so many other Black feminists, Jennifer Nash just kind of reorients us to the future, right? So it's like we have this moment, this reckoning with this defensiveness, whether it's justified, whether it isn't. But at the end of the day, where do we go with that? How do we mobilize that?
Yeah, when the book first came out, I can't remember reading the entire thing, I want to be honest. I think it came out right as I was doing comps, maybe. I didn't. So I remember reading the introduction most certainly and being like, okay.
Are you mad?
I said, okay. I said, I'm gonna come back when I'm better. Like maybe especially like for someone who is not a Black woman, but it's also often like misgendered as cis. Cis and like cis man. Like so when I came back around this time, particularly now that I'm out, I can't remember if I was out when it first came out. I can't remember. This time around, when it got to that line around defensive, I listened to it on through audiobook. I paused and I said, yeah, we are. We are. And I think without therapy, I wouldn't have been able to be so accepting this time around.
Yeah.
But then as she was talking, and as I was listening, what kept coming to mind for me was like, okay, like, I guess the what first comes to mind is really this question from Shaka Khan: do you love what you feel? Right? Like, and like, are you paying attention? Like, what is it about being called defensive that is necessary? That's actually not a negative thing.
Right.
We've made that a negative thing, particularly around the ways that Black women defend intersectionality and Black feminism.
Right.
So there's a justifiable defensiveness, right? So yeah, like this time around, I said, oh, like, and then particularly her ideas around being a critic.
Yes.
I off and on call myself a cultural critic, and I also call myself like being very self-critical, and that can show up in a lot of emotional and intellectual ways, sometimes productive, sometimes not. So yeah, like her thoughts around the kind of love and grace that a critic may or may not receive was also something that I really sat with, like in a kind of emotional and intellectual way. Like,
absolutely.
Like what is the usefulness of taking on and moving as a critic? And then like, what is the usefulness of holding on or letting go intersectionality?
Yeah.
And our conceptions about it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Dr. Story, I would love to hear about the Pleasure Ninjas and being overtly, openly, unmistakably Black women and queer folks moving in public in ways that reclaim our birthright to pleasure. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So like, I love the Pleasure Ninjas too. I'm just so grateful. And the collective really was formed by Joan Morgan, Dr. Joan Morgan, and we all meet in 2009. I think it's 2009 or 2011. I don't know, whatever. We met all at this conference, and this is the first time I met Joan. And I just started crying because, like, again, Joan wrote Chicken Heads. I took my in undergrad. I took Black Feminisms in Action course by Francesca Royster, and that's the first time I read it. And I was like, oh my gosh, she gets it, and she gets me.
Yeah.
Yes, right. I mean, especially the part where she talks about, like, so I'm gonna put a lip on, and I'm gonna put this dress on, and if don't, and nobody gonna say nothing to me, and that's the feminist way. But what if I want somebody to say something to me?
Right.
What if I, in fact, invite the gays? Why do I not have enough agency to invite a gays upon my person? Right? And what does that desire mean? And I'm like, yes, exactly. You know, and so she was a hero to me and of mine. Same with Brittany. Same with Treva. Esther and her were like contemporaries, and then Yaba met her first before me. So I was like salty about that because I told Yaba to read Joan's book. She was like, I don't want to read no white feminism, nothing. Wow. You know, and I said, girl, and I said, let me show you. And so I gave her Joan's book. She loved Joan's book. So that collective and Joan's like, we should start talking about pleasure because Joan was saying that she saw it reflected in all of our work in terms of us putting feelings at the center or putting affect at the center of most of our published work, right? Where we talk about our own position, our own situatedness in most of our publications, being Black feminists, being Black feminist scholars, and felt like Black feminism had become too beholden to intersectionality, cultural semblance, respectability. These were these kind of major theoretical interventions and had lacked, had started creating, right, an idea around pleasure as a Black feminist birthright, but wanted to get more into that. Like, what does a Black feminist future look like with pleasure incorporated? What do some of these images that we formerly might have seen as controlling or stereotypical or not pushing the culture forward or elevating the culture, what if they aren't problematic? What if they aren't controlling images? Right. What if we are inviting, right? Like as Cohen. What if they are the deviant? What if this is, right? What if they're performing a deviant politic, right? On purpose, intentionally, like what about those things? Right. And so we wanted to talk about that stuff. And we also, you know, and I feel like Treva calls it feminist math, where we basically talk about pleasure in an academic way, and we go to these conferences in these really nice locations, and we get to like commune with one another and visit with one another. We do the conference part, but we also do the turn up part and the pleasure part. And I think that all of us at one point in time felt like, as a Black feminist, that wasn't a part of Black feminism, that there wasn't an interior life for Black women that wasn't always serious, always scholarly, always academic, always deconstructing, always observing, right? Like, and so I think for us, forming the collective allowed to free all of us in some ways to be able to just be, right? Like, we're coming here with the conference thing, but you ain't about to demand me be no scholar 24 365, you know. I'm just, and I'm not even like, again, I'm just a nerd. I'm just someone who like to read, I like to learn, and I like to party, and I like to turn up, and I like to kick back, and I want to go to the drag show. You know what I mean? I want to be in my life because most of my ideas come from my life. And living, and so it was a politic as much as we were writing about it in a theoretical way. We really wanted to kind of enact that in our own lives. I mean, all of us get worn out, bombarded by students. Every single student right? Because it's not just that we have to deal with the Black queer students or the Black feminists who are queer, right? We're dealing with the white children too.
Right.
We're dealing with all the white LGBT kids. We're dealing with the feminists who don't want to deal with the other feminists in the department, right? We're dealing with all of the kids. Meanwhile, the little white cis straight man, he get to go to Rome the whole summer.
Literally.
Nobody emailing him. Right. He get to conduct his research all day and drink wine with his wife at night.
Yeah.
And he ain't got no have to mentor, and you know, so I'm like, you know, this is something's amiss. And it's that, because we're not just doing the work we do, but we love it. And we love these students. We love enriching folks' lives with teaching them truth. And so it's a way that academia, women's studies, right, departments, they exploit those things.
Absolutely.
Having it end all and be all the time.
Absolutely. I think this is so important. And I'm so grateful that we, and I say we, the collective we, right? Black folk have been having this conversation more over the last decade or so, right? I think it started off when people were riding the little bicycle seat bikes, the little banana bikes, and they was like, carefree Black girls. Like, carefree Black girls missed it a little bit. They was almost there. They didn't have a theory. They was almost there, right? But I feel like we've been pushing, right? We've been pushing really hard to think about self-care as being more than like mani-pedis and massages, and thinking about it as removing ourselves from systems that are seeking to extract labor and to extract energy that we will never get back, right? So I want to now think about this, specifically thinking about you, AD, and this idea of how this fits into a Black future, right? And I don't want to have this whole conversation on Afro-pessimism and Afro-futurism. I'm not trying to break the internet. I'm not trying to do none of that tonight. But I do think it's important because Nash, you know, explicitly talks about the centrality of death in much of what we do as Black feminists and much of what we theorize, right? It's almost inescapable, right? There are many ways that the state's intention, right, the necropolitical state works and intentions itself to annihilate Blackness. That orchestrates so much of our day-to-day lives in public and in private, right? So those things are inescapable. But I think that both texts, right, are seeking to are trying to see ourselves outside of those systems, right? Trying to say yes, that's a fact, right? This exists. But and also, right? There is a possible future. There's a possible us, where we don't have to tether ourselves in the same ways to those imaginaries, into those contexts, into those containers. I want to hear from you about that because that's what you do. What? Tell me. I'm listening.
Yeah. So in terms of the Afrofuturism and Afropessimism question, I think if you had this conversation with me 2 or 3 years ago, I'd be like, oh yeah, they're different, they're not connected. But actually, when we really take seriously how anti-Blackness operates in not just the real world, but also in our psychic and spiritual lives, I think it's been important to remember how Afrofuturism gives us ways out of and through and to navigate and to even narrate our experiences in that. So, like when I think about Citizen as a potentially Afrofuturist text, like I've already brought up like the haunting effect, but there's a way that she's just very clear that we are on one level living in the afterlife of slavery, that that the past bleeds into the present, and can at any point, right? But I think then reading Rankin and Nash together, I think that there are ways that we have to be mindful that Black feminism, I think at its core is something that helps us survive, which is why I think we're defensive about it. Like literally this is something that is helping us live and helping us move through through this thing, right? So when I think about both of them potentially doing Afrofuturist work, it's about understanding the kind of like the reality of the gravity of the psychic weight that this thing can hold on us across generations, and being mindful about that.
Yeah.
And not displacing ourselves out of some kind of woo-woo, unintentional, like I one of my critiques about Afrofuturism, which is actually kind of consistent with the ways that Nash talks about intersectionality having a lot of originality force connected to it.
Yeah.
Afrofuturism definitely does too.
Yeah.
So that like even like the correct way to venture out and to have a future like that, those are things that I think that they're also trying to get us to question and interrogate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So T, got your story? What do y'all think? I mean, I think I said what I thought. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I sit with texts like this, or specifically Rankin, it helps me to
Mm,
think of poetry as quilts, and how they kind of weave fiction and nonfiction and lyricism together. And I think it does so in this way that it kind of carves roads, right? And these are roads that are shaping cultural landscapes, but also challenging them. And I think in that way, they serve as both inlets and outlets. But it's also a deeply historical and a deeply ancestral practice, right? Like very deeply rooted in the Black radical tradition. I think it connects us to our ancestors, right? We bring them with us through poetry and through art, but it also connects us to our descendants, right?
yeah.
Those that we will never meet, those that will
Yeah.
exist in worlds that we can only dream of, and imagine. And I think, an important part of what this work does, what this poetry does, maybe even what you would consider as an Afrofuturist project, is that it allows us to envision, our past and our future. And when I was reading this, it made me think of Eve Ewing's poem. I saw Emmett Till this week at the grocery store, where she imagines an alternate reality where Emmett Till wasn't murdered and she encounters him just casually grocery shopping in the store, right? Yeah, and it's like, poetry can transcend and redefine space and time. And so just thinking about these complexities of Black life that don't exist as a single moment, right? I mean, not as a single experience. This freedom, the creativity, the artistry of this poetry, of this Afrofuturist work, it gives us to think about how to be, but also how we could be and how we've been, right? So there's these deep roots that are in the Black community. I think perhaps sort of this great power of this work, of Rankin's work, is this ability to kind of branch off and branch off and branch off in ways that seek to kind of show us just how capacious Blackness is.
And I love that the how to be and how we've been. I love that because I feel like I feel like that's a part of a pleasure praxis, right?
Yes.
And Brittany reminds us, as a historian who's a pleasure ninja, she reminds us so well about how even enslaved folk, they would gather for these dances in which they got to feel and enjoy one another. And how in each instance, how we've has been connected to pleasure as much as it's been connected to anti-Blackness, white supremacy, like domestic terrorism, is that we have not only survived, but we've thrived in certain senses, right? And that has to be something that's acknowledged. And so pleasure isn't, even though we're talking about it now, and even though it's really, really a thing now, like you see everywhere, self-care and pleasure and all of those things, but we've always done that. And we've always had that, right? We've created our own spaces. We've created, right, when we're shut out of fraternities and sororities, we create our own spaces. We create our own prides, right? When we, when the mainstream pride is not giving, right, with the racial microaggressions and the cisnormativity sometimes that be popping up at Pride, right? It's not giving. Then we create our own spaces, and I think that that's a part of a pleasure practice, creating one's own space has everything to do with one enjoying that space, one not having to, at least you would hope, not to navigate so many like overt acts of racism, sexism, misogyny, I mean, all these things, and to have some kind of respite and some type of joy and access to those things. And so it's been a part of our tradition, and it also is a part of our future, that the idea of how we've been and how we can be. And that should always include a pleasure praxis. And it's on really, those are really subjective. Like, I'm with you, Jen. I hate the whole like, and again, there's nothing wrong with petties and manicures and all those kinds of things if that's your thing. But I feel like, yes, you know what I mean? But I feel like that, you know, it has to be something more even intentional than just that. It has to be something that's intentional about the spirit, and about the metabolic stuff, about like all of those things, because you can't experience any kind of pleasure if you're not here and thriving, right, and all of those things. So it relates to all of these other avenues, and it's a part of our freedom dreaming.
Absolutely.
You know, it can't be just something we kind of indulge in from time to time when we've exhausted and worn ourselves thin, right?
Absolutely. So I want to remind folks who are watching, you can drop questions in the chat, because I'm coming up on the last question, and I'm not a person who holds people in the conversation. I will let us go. I love giving time back. So if there are no questions, this will be the last question. The last question is, you know, after reading these texts, what would you want folks in the room to take away? What would be the kind of the little nuggets that you would hope that folks would get if they haven't read it or they have read it, but just what stood out for you?
I think my answer to that is about Black feminism and Black feminist contributions as a whole. You know, I'm thinking about Bell Hooks, who said Black feminism is for everybody, and Combahee, who said, you know, until Black women are free, nobody will be free. You know, I think, you know, at its core, Black feminism is not just this intellectual project that's concerned with women's rights. It's begging us to always ask what is next, and also what is possible if we just imagine, what becomes possible if we just think about it, if we think otherwise. It's this idea of radicalism, and I think something that I try to think about and keep present in my work is this Black feminist orientation towards radicalism, in the sense of how do we get to the root? And how do we get to the root of social problems? So it's not about reform. It's not about new iterations, right? It's about what else is there? What else can we build? What can we reimagine? What do we not even have and need to make, you know? And so I think that Black feminists and Black feminist texts are architects of languages and theories and epistemologies that get us free. So without Black feminist works, from where do we build movements? From where do we go? From where do we get our knowledge from where do we get our heartbeat, you know? And I think, as Nash kind of reminds us, that Black feminism is not just a moment or a critique of women's studies, right? It's malleable. It implores us to remake. It implores us to reimagine. And so when I leave from Black feminist texts, I leave with new tools and new ideas to get to the world that I yearn for. So I think that's something that I want to leave people with is, you know, I always see Black feminism and Black feminist texts as my touchstones. Have those touchstones, return and leave with new tools and new orientations to build that world that you yearn for, that your siblings yearn for.
Yes. I mean, I feel like that is it right there. Yes. I do. I mean, I completely and wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that from both of these texts, you really get to peek in the interior lives of Black feminist scholars and Black women navigating, Black people navigating a world that has a visceral reaction to their existence, to their audacity, to their joy, that is constantly trying to snuff it out in any way that it can, and how getting still they are able to recover from those things, strategize against those things, push back against those things, activate against those things, right? And so it literally is a roadmap, you know, and I know Nash will be like, girl, that's not it. Because I just want to say Black feminists is the blueprint, right? I mean, like, it's straight up, like, Black feminists are the blueprint. I mean, the tradition is what made me want to become a scholar. It made me interested in college and learning. I'm like, who are these women? You know, like, you getting Toni Cade Bambara, you like, what is going on? You know, and so I mean, they and as much as a lot of the four like founders have passed on and they're in another realm, their texts continue to live. Their texts were so ahead of their time that they are still relevant in 2023. I mean, you read Ida B. Wells, and it got everything to do with these viral Karen videos. It got everything to do with what's going on right now with police and state violence. I mean, so they're living texts that you can use to freedom dream, imagine, strategize, heal. So much. I mean, so, and I really thank you, Jen, for having me read these texts again and really reinvigorate what's in both of them. There's so many gems in both of them.
Yeah. And if I can just respond to something really quickly that you said, Dr. Story, I think it's not even in certain contexts wrong to say that it's the blueprint, right? I think Black feminism, it's a cosmos, right? There's not going to be a single blueprint. There's going to be multiple, but I think this is kind of what I was saying with touchstones, returning to them. How do we remain malleable? How do we merge them together? How do we continue to reimagine and rethink through it? So I think, you know, it is the blueprint, but there's multiple, and we just have to navigate through that. And that's why it's a collective thing,
it's
right?
blueprints. It's the blueprints. Yes.
And I think to that point, something that is sitting with me in just this moment is that this unfortunate falsehood that I see online often, that feminism is destroying the Black community. And there is such a way that is so uninformed, and I think it comes from this idea that feminism, Black or not, is this one singular thing that can only help one singular person. When honestly, the truth of feminism, the truth of Black feminism, the truth of the intellectual history of Black femme folks and trans folks and queer folks is that at all points, the intellectual traditions, the analytics that we have created, the kind of liberation work that we push for has always benefited those of us who are in more privileged spaces than we are in our connected communities, right? And that has been through a feminist impulse. That like, whether they were calling it feminist, whether they were calling it Black feminist, whether they were calling it queer or not, that they at all points it was that impulse that was liberatory.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that these texts are on one point telling us there is this history that we have to pay attention to and be more mindful of and very much pay attention to, but then also we have to everyone's point, we have to move out and
absolutely
be clear that Black feminism, intersectionality, queerness, Afro-pessimism, whichever the thing is that helps you move and helps you navigate. That these aren't ideas that just sit on the shelf. That they are part of our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And I want to add, so we have a question. I'm excited about it. I want to add that, you know, one of the things I think is important is that we do feel challenged, right? I think it's okay. I think we all said tonight that we felt challenged, right? At certain points reading these texts. And that is great, right? I think it's very strange that we live in this moment where folks want to read and then have everything they read and consume just affirm and reconfirm what they already believe about themselves in the world, and just to exist unchallenged and to never grow. It's a strange way to adult. However, I think it's excellent that we are also acknowledging that even in our academic pursuits, right, in the field that tells you to never admit when you feel that you may have fallen short, or that you didn't know the answer, or you didn't know the hidden curricula, that you may have reconsidered. And I think that I reconsidered when I read Nash this time around. And I think that I think it's important for us to respect this concept of Black feminist curiosity as not just being curious about the things that feel good
Mhm.
for us, but also curious about the things
Mhm.
that challenge us. So I think that's something I took away. It was just, I really am excited about my Black feminist curiosity now being in a place where I can also feel challenged and still pursue.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the question we have is, how do we bring visibility to cultural critique and Black feminist theory without reproducing the top-down transfer of information?
Mm.
That's a great question.
Mm. I think first and foremost, we challenge our ideas of leadership, hierarchy, and humanity, even, and to be people centered. I think there aren't hierarchies and a top down approach in a world that believes that everyone should have access to knowledge and that everyone contributes to knowledge. I think the relationships that I think about with people, they don't have edges, they don't have corners. We're all in each other's orbit. We're all entitled to critique and also be critiqued. So I think I would say that's the first step, is to rethink and to challenge how we even view leadership and how we even create relationships and dynamics where there is no top down approach, because we're all entitled to
Mhm,
that and we all
mhm,
contribute to that
mhm.
knowledge.
AD, got a story?
I mean, that's it. I mean, I really wouldn't add that. I mean, I think that that's the way that I approach things, that there isn't a presumption of a hierarchy or
Mm-hmm,
a top down or this idea of a consummate authority. I don't even
mm-hmm,
like my students to see, like, you know, they know I'm a professor, they know I'm Dr. Story, but I want them to push back on me. I want them to challenge me. I mean, to the, you know, sometimes they'll be like, Doc, you just an old gay. You
Right.
know, they have to explain stuff to me. They be like, you just an old gay girl. And I'll be like, yes, because some of the social justice things, all that, like, teach me, right?
yes, yes,
I'm ready to receive. I'm ready to
Yeah.
learn. So any critique or informing that I would give, I would see it as I would definitely do it with keeping in mind of my own self, who wants
yes,
to know more and who wants to be engaged. So I think that you can approach it with a hierarchy in mind or a top down. I think, you know, and I'm trying to like add something. That's what I say. You said it. I don't need to even
yeah,
add nothing to it. I mean, that's
yeah,
exactly it. That's exactly
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I,
AD?
I think too. I think we need to be mindful about where's that feeling coming from, right? That it might potentially be
Mm.
top down. I think in
Mhm.
conversations around our living and what can potentially um, not just make our lives better, but what critiques and what analysis um, are very like clearly happening in the midst of our lives, right? And analyzing and being clear about what's happening.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah, I think that educating people about that, uh, if there is a top-down approach, it might only be because of dishonesty from a
mm,
particular party that we have to be more honest about. Um, so yeah, I think that we have to be clearer about where would that energy even come from at the outset.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
What is the perception
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
perhaps what is the
Mhm.
perception about Black feminism or about intersectionality that would even prompt that
right,
to
right.
Mhm.
So this question came from
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
Subversive. Thank you for this question. I want to also tell y'all, if you want to drop your contact information, any links, any websites in the chat right now, I'm going to also answer the question and I'm going to wrap it up because it's time to go. It's a Friday night. We got things to do. The blackening is out. Okay. Um, yes. So the
Oh
last thing I think I will
yeah.
add on this question is that, the first Black feminist teacher I ever had was my mother and my grandmother, and they had not, neither one of them has a college education. The women in my community were my first Black feminist teachers. They
Mhm.
taught me about my body and how I move through the world, and they gave me my earliest
Mhm.
lessons. And it wasn't until I was in college that I started to read texts from Melissa Harris Perry and Angela Davis and Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde that I began to
Mhm.
to have this common language
Mm.
um, that is Black feminist theory, but I always had the concepts. So what I will say is that, you know, the way we think about this is to stop thinking about Black feminist theory as something that belongs in institutions where we brought it to, right? It doesn't originate from, right? Black feminist theory does not originate from these white supremacist institutions, right? Black feminist theorizing originates from our communities, our homes, our organizations, our churches, our daycare centers. That's where the Black feminist theory was birthed. So that's what we should be talking about when we're having cultural conversations with our people. We should be talking about our communities and in our communities. We shouldn't be talking from a place of these institutions, right? Like, the texts are critical and important, right? But the text, if we're not reading texts that are reflective of our experiences in community, what are we reading? Because everything that I think we're reading tonight is absolutely reflective of my experiences in community. Yeah. So I think that's how you do it, right? You talk about your people. You lead talking about your people, and you center your people first.
That's a word.
I love y'all. I'm so glad we did this
thank
evening.
you so much. I had so much fun. I love y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen.
Thank y'all for coming.
Yeah.
Hey.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so everybody follow my friends, and then I gotta have y'all back. This is only number 2, but it's been popping. I'm 2 for 2. I'm 2 for 2.
This is so much fun.
Okay, boo. I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of y'all weekend.
You too.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride,
y'all. Happy Pride, y'all. Bye.
Oh, and
Happy
Juneteenth.
Most definitely.
Okay.
Love y'all. Good night.
See y'all.
Bye.
All right, y'all.